Alright, in this video I'm going to be showing you how you can take a high dynamic range photograph. And what a high dynamic range photograph is where we can capture a wide range of light levels and just capture that in our camera. So if I just take a regular picture right now, and that's what it comes out. It's not very good. The sky's properly exposed, but the problem is the foreground isn't. It's pretty dark. And that's because our cameras can only capture a limited set of dynamic range. Our eyes can see much more. That's why when you take a picture, it's never as good as what you're actually seeing with your eyes. So in order to get around this, the simplest way is to take one picture of the sky and have that picture be properly exposed for the sky. So the sky looks all normal. And then take another picture of the foreground properly exposed. So in other words, the foreground would be all nice and bright and well lit. Then what we would do is just combine those on the computer so you can see the sky and the foreground at the same time. Now that's the simplest way of doing a high dynamic range picture. But there are even better ways where you can take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pictures, and all the pictures have different, they go down from the really bright ones all the way down to the really dark ones. And then we can combine all of those to make a picture similar to what we see with our eyes. So what are the settings that you need to have on your camera to take those 9 pictures and combine them? Well, first off, I'm going to have my camera on a tripod, because if I'm taking 9 pictures, I don't want the camera to be moving during those 9 pictures. I want it to be sturdy and in the same position. Next, I'm going to want the lowest ISO possible, because I'm taking a landscape photo and there's no reason to have a high ISO. So we just want the lowest one possible to eliminate noise. Next, we're going to want to make sure that we have the white balance set for the same thing for all the pictures. So in order to do that, just put your camera on anything other than auto white balance. Next, we want to take the photos in RAW format. This is good because RAW format captures a wider range than JPEGs, so your image is going to be more high quality. Next thing you're going to want to turn on your camera, if your camera has it, is exposure delay mode. Now exposure delay mode is where the mirror will go up in your camera and it will wait and then take the picture a second later. This eliminates the vibration of the mirror flopping up and then the camera automatically taking a picture right after. So with exposure delay mode off, basically when you take a bunch of pictures, it's going to sound like this. And you heard that every time it goes click, 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 it's actually causing vibrations in the camera. And that kind of makes it less than perfect, less than perfectly tack sharp. So if your camera has it, turn exposure delay mode on, and what it will do is lift up the mirror and then take the picture. So that time you heard it took like a whole second to take the picture. That's because it lifts up the mirror, waits, then snaps a picture. So that's one thing that I usually always use. Another thing is use a cable release or wireless remote. This, again, it just ensures that you're not moving the camera in any way. And of course, what mode would you want to take the photographs on? Would you want to take them in manual mode, shutter priority mode, aperture mode, automatic? You're going to want to use aperture priority mode. This is because we want to keep the aperture constant, because we don't want different depth of fields in each frame. We want to keep the depth of field the same throughout all the 9 exposures. And then we want to just change the shutter speed for each picture. That's the only variable that we're going to be changing. One other thing that I usually do is I set my camera to manual focus. This is to ensure that the camera doesn't try to autofocus between the 9 different pictures, and one picture might be out of focus compared to the other one. So it's always just an extra step if you want to do it to make sure your photo is going to be perfect. It's just to switch it in manual focus after you're done autofocusing. Last but of course not least, you're going to want to put on your auto bracketing feature on your camera. What this will do is take, in its most simplest form, is it will take one dark picture one bright picture, and then one just right in the middle. Now of course my camera can take 9 different pictures, so it's going to be taking a really dark one, a slightly less darker one, a slightly less darker one, a middle range one, and then a brighter one, and then even a brighter one. And it's going to do that throughout 9 stops. So we're going to be capturing a very wide range. Now some cameras will have the automatic exposure bracketing in the camera listed in the menu, and other cameras will have it as a dedicated button on the physical camera itself. Other cameras might not even have it at all, so if that's the case, you're going to have to manually adjust the EV amount when you're in aperture priority mode. Alright, so I'm going to set it to take 9 exposures because that's the widest it can take. And now I'm simply going to hold down the button, and my camera's in continuous shooting mode right now, so if I just hold down the button, you can hear that it's taking all the photos. Alright, great, we have all of our photos, and now let's go on the computer and combine them. Alright, so we are now inside of Adobe Bridge, and here are the pictures that I took. And I did end up taking JPEGs just for the sake of speed. If I was taking raw images, the processing would take a little bit longer. So what I'm going to do is highlight them by clicking the first one, and then holding down the Shift key, and then clicking the last one in the series. Then I'm going to go up to Tools, Photoshop, Merge to HDR Pro. I'm going to click that and it will automatically open Photoshop and it will begin merging them. Alright, so that took about 1 minute to complete. And now you will see here, we can see our photos on the bottom and we have a bunch of tools on the right side. What I'm going to do is select 16-bit because if I wanted to edit the image later in Photoshop, 16-bit will give me more leeway. 8-bit, I could do it, but there's not as much information contained in the image if I'm on 16-bit. So I'm going to select that, and now you'll see that if we zoom in here, the sky is kind of blurred, and that's because we took 9 different pictures, and that kind of took a while to take all those. So naturally, the sky is moving during those 9 exposures, and so when you combine all these pictures, it's going to blur them out. If you like this effect, keep it in there, but if you don't like it, you can select this Removed Ghosts checkbox in the top right corner. And what that will do is you will be able to select an image of your choice, and it will use that image only for the ghosted areas. So I like that right there. And now usually people just play around with the sliders. Usually I like to start in the details, and let's see here. You always have to go back and forth to see which variable's the best, and I think about 46% is good for that. The strength slider usually just makes it so that there's less gray, and it usually gives it a little bit more contrast. And the radius, if you bump it up too high, it will blow out some areas. Like if I bump it way up, it's going to blow out the clouds. I could readjust the gamma for that, and that's where you're going to get the good results, is where you mess with the radius and then you mess with the gamma, and hopefully you'll get an image that's kind of evened out. Now I'm liking it at about 0.7 on the gamma and about 440 on the radius. So I'm just going to leave that how it is. I'm not going to mess with it anymore. And the strength I have on 4, I could bump that down and it would just make it more gray-ish. I'm I'm thinking it's looking good. So I'm not even going to mess with it anymore. I think that looks fine. I'm just going to click OK and let it process that thing, and we'll look at the result. Alright, so here it is. If we zoom in really close, you can see that it's done a pretty good job. There's not a lot of halos right now. Sometimes you will get halos if the detail slider is slid up all the way up, and the radius and the strength are slid up pretty high, and that's when you get that unnatural looking HDR image, which is fine if you're into that type of thing. But so I'm just going to click auto contrast to bump the contrast up a little bit. And now what I could do also is use my quick selection tool and just select the landscape area and then click auto contrast on that one area. Then I could invert my selection and auto contrast just the sky. So now we're getting like a really nice looking HDR image. A lot of people don't usually do that. I do that frequently, but if you want more of a natural image, you can go this route. If you want more of that HDR look, you can do the selected auto contrasted areas, and you'll get a look like that. And because we're in 32-bit, or 16-bit, it's not going to hurt too much if we edit it too much. So that's always nice. And then when you're done, you can go to File, Save As, and then save it as a regular JPEG like you would normally. PS HDR. Save. Okay, there we go. Now there is another way we can do this. We can actually open it up in a program called Photomatix Pro, or maybe you can pronounce it Photomatix. So in order to do that, I'm just going to drag these photos into Photomatix Pro and have the merge to HDR processing checked. Click OK. Now the reduce ghosting feature in Photomatix is different than it is in Photoshop. For example, if you're taking a picture of a landscape but there's a person moving throughout the frame between the 9 different pictures that you take, Photoshop will not do a very good job of removing the ghosting if the person has moved significantly. But Photomatix Pro will. And you can remove the ghosting when a person is moving in the frame if you just select semi-manual, and that's what's usually recommended. So I'm just going to have that on right now. I've tested this before, and when I had automatic selected, it didn't do a very good job of removing the ghosting from the clouds in this picture. So I'm going to leave that on. I'm going to leave reduce noise off and all these other things off, just for the sake of time. Now this is the selective deghosting preview that you'll get once the images have gone through some processing. What you're going to have to do is basically you're going to make a selection of the areas that you want deghosted. So I already know that I just want the clouds deghosted, so I'm going to make a selection of that, and I just did that. Next we're going to right click inside of it, mark the selected ghost area, and to choose the photo of what photo we want it to be defaulted to, I'm just going to select the -2 EV photo. That's the darker photo, because I know that the sky is really bright, so I'm going to want to choose the darker photo for that area. You can preview it, and it always looks weird when you preview it. Just click OK and move on to the next step. Alright, so now it will bring up the tone map options. And this is where, personally, I think Photomatix kind of is superior to the Photoshop HDR, because there's several different methods of blending the photos together. The 3 main ones are the enhancer method, the compressor method, which will give you a more natural result, as you can see here, and the fusion method. Now I don't want to get into lots of detail into all these different methods, because I would be here for about, I don't know, an hour or two. So usually, in most circumstances, a lot of people use the enhancer method. This is pretty cool because It's very similar to what we just did in Photoshop, but it just gives us a little bit more leeway to mess with the image. For example, I can adjust the highlight smoothness and the shadow smoothness. Photoshop does not have that option. I can adjust the saturation in just the highlights and just the shadows, and Photoshop doesn't have that option either. There's just much more sliders to play around with, and there's more control, I think, in Photomatix. So if you want to pay it for the money and get Photomatix, go ahead and get it. I would really recommend it if you really want to get into HDR photography. But if you are happy with what you have already, just use Photoshop and it'll blend the photos just fine for you. Alright, now here's a technique where you can manually tone map your images. As you can see here, I've taken 3 pictures. I've taken one where I exposed for the trees right here behind the window. I took another one where I pretty much exposed for the room, and these plants right here are almost perfectly exposed. And the last one I took just to brighten up the right edge of the photograph just a little bit. If you can see in this photo, it's kind of dark over here, so I decided to take another one, just brighten that up right there. And so now what we can do is create a layer mask on the middle layer here and then work our way up. So I'm going to grab a black paintbrush and I'm just going to paint in the areas that are too bright in this picture to erase them, just like this. And now that reveals this photo that is behind it, and it brings back the detail in the trees back there. And now I can adjust the opacity on my brush and the size on my brush to get into finer details on this thing. Now I don't want to spend like an hour doing what the computer could do automatically. So I'm just going to quickly go in here and just brush this in. Just like that. That's looking fine for me right now. And now I'm going to brighten up that little spot that was right here at the right edge. So I'm going to enable the last photo, create a layer mask on it. And then I'm just going to invert the layer mask just to turn the whole thing off temporarily. I'm going to grab a white brush this time, make it really big, really soft. And with my opacity just on 30%, I'm just going to brighten up that little area. And that's all it really needs, is just like that right there. So here's before and after. And you can see the tone map, so to say, on these layer masks. This is exactly what the Photomatix software is doing and what the Photoshop software is doing when you do this automatically. What it's doing is that it's taking the dark pictures and replacing the dark pixels with a pixel from a brighter picture. And it'll do that on a pixel by pixel basis, so it's perfect. When you're doing it manually like this, it's hard to get into all these little fine details. You'd be spending hours if you wanted to do that. If you do it in the software, it's going to look great. So that's how you manually tone map an image if you wanted to. Not a lot of people I know use this technique. I do use it every now and then, but that's just there if you want to play around with that. That's always good to do in some circumstances.